Did you ever wonder how cheap can you actually buy a house at auction? Some people have actually picked up properties for the price of a used car, but what's the real story behind these properties? And in this video, we're going to break it down. Me and Paul, we bought houses across the country for decades through online auctions. So we've seen stuff from the high end to the very low end that we're going to cover in this video. So let's start off with talking about what affects the price of an auction house. So the price of to pick up a property on auction is going to vary for a few different factors, right? What's first, like what's the property's condition? Is it a real big fixer-upper, structural issues, or is it just need paint and carpet because it looks like 1990s? And then what's the location? Is it urban versus rural? And then within that market, is it an affluent high market or is it kind of like a more lower end type of market, depressed? And then depending on what type of sale, it varies. What I mean by what type of sale is there's different types of auctions. There's sheriff's auctions, which is the a pre-foreclosure property going into the foreclosure process. There's REO properties where the bank already taken back the property and they're selling it as a bank-owned property. And there's also like tax lien auctions where some of these properties just go for the amount of taxes owed on the property, and they're usually once or twice a year these tax sales at the county courthouse. And then ultimately, what's the buy? What are the bidders' demand and interest? They're basically most likely investors buying these properties. So yeah, bargains do exist on auctions, but not all auction properties are dirt cheap. And that's what we're going to kind of cover next is some real life examples on how low some of these auction properties can go. And it's going to vary throughout the country. So if you're living in the Northeast or on the West Coast, you're used to, homes in the mid to high six figures and $1 million, whereas parts of the U.S., like in the Southeast and parts of the Midwest, you might see nice homes in after repair value in the 100s and 200s, where you could get a real fixer upper in something close to like $20,000, $50,000. So it's going to vary first with where in the country you are. There's cities that it could be economically oppressed. Like years ago, you would be able to buy around the financial crisis blocks in Detroit for like $500 a house. And then there's also Rust Belt cities where the industry left. There's not a lot of jobs around. Again, you could pick up properties for a few $1,000s. And then there's other advantages going to tax sales where you could pick up a decent property potentially for a really low rate, for a really low number as well. And just remember though, just because you're getting a property cheap doesn't mean it's move-in ready, and most likely it's going to need a lot of work and or structural issues and mechanical issues. So the catch with these cheap auction properties are property condition, right? Most of them are going to need major repairs, roofing, plumbing, electrical, maybe structure. Are there additional liens and back taxes on why it's so cheap? I've been seeing recently a lot on some properties where it's actually a nice home. We think it's a deal. And then, why is it being offered this cheap? You come to realize that it has a $40,000 solar panel lien on the property and it can't get wiped. So that's why it's being offered even cheaper, as one example. It could be a numerous other liens on the property as well. And then, with these, usually at the auction, you're taking on risk too, because you can't do inspections. Most are being sold as is, and you might not be able to get access to the interior. So you got to assume some worst case scenario stuff. And then in all these properties too, you're going to need cash. Most likely, no one's going to finance you unless it's like a hard money lender or asset-based lender, and not a traditional type of financing vehicle. So yes, you could get them cheaply, these properties, but those are some of the main risk factors there. So what's the reasonable expectation with these properties? For most buyers, a realistic cheap auction home might be anywhere from 30 to 50% below market value. That's a lot of the auction properties that me and Paul pick up through the bank owned process. So if you got a $20,000 home, you might be able to pick it up and for the low 100s if it's in decent shape. Now, can you get a true steal for like less than 100 on that? You can, but most likely it's going to have some of those issues that we talked about from an extensive repair perspective, or kind of like a solar panel lien that I gave an example earlier. And then lastly, some of the things for, finding the best auction deals out there. You check, there's different platforms. You could check the local county that you're in, start there. You're going to have two different types of auctions all the time. Usually you'll have a monthly sheriff sale auction. That's a pre-foreclosure property going into the foreclosure, and then there's once or twice a year, there's different types of tax sales, upset and judicial tax sales. So it's a great way to find cheap property. There's a lot of online platforms that you can check out too, such as auction.com, where they'll have three different types of auctions, an REO auction, foreclosure auctions on there, and they'll have private seller auctions on there as well, which is someone that might have inherited a property just looking to sell it through auction. And then lastly, if you want to focus on cheap properties, don't go into the major cities most likely. You're probably be more rural areas as well. And you're going to have your funding set up ahead of time too, making sure you have the cash to buy these, renovate them, or having or a pre-approval letter from like an asset-based lender out there, kind of like a quasi hard money lender to help finance these deals for you. So let's quickly take a look at auction.com. Bring this up. You can see here, a quick way to look at properties. This is all auctions, just the state of Pennsylvania. Quick way to look at it is just to this sort here by price, and you can kind of give a quick flavor of what a low end property looks like. You can see here, opening bid TBD, TBD. Let's see if some of these are starting at $1. This one is starting at opening bid 29. TBD $1. You could see here though, if we pick an auction that has $1, it could be one of two things. It could be a marketing tease just to get people interested in it, or it's in a property that's depressed essentially. So here's an example of $1 opening bid. Again, just in the mix of this town here, but it's all boarded up and very dated. Looks like going to need everything, and it's probably over 100 years old. So this is an example of a property with a starting bid of $1. So from there, this might not be a deal at all, even though you're thinking I could buy a house for $1, just because, if I have to put $60,000 into this, what will it sell for after doing that? Or if I got to put 30,000 into it to make it rentable, what's the monthly rent I could get on that? Just because it's a low dollar value doesn't necessarily mean it's a deal. So this is an example of a low dollar property here on what that looks like. Let's see if we could do one more. Let's do a TBD. Here's a $25,000 bid in Sharon, Pennsylvania, which is Northwest Pennsylvania. You can kind of see here that, what does a property at 25K look like? So you need some landscape on the outside, overgrown brushes. But as you can tell here, a lot of these cheaper properties not only don't always have pictures. So you're gonna have to assume the worst. If it looks like bad on the outside, you got to assume it needs everything on the inside. And again, just because it's cheap, how much do I have to do to renovate it to get into something livable? And then what it could sell for is the main question to see if it's something that you should pursue looking at going forward. Hope this video was helpful. And if you did, smash the like button. Feel free to share to someone else. And if you have any other questions, drop them in the chat below, and we'll put in links from other videos that I mentioned that could help out along the auction process.